Hello again. This is a tutorial for the final part in a series about Mesh Baker LOD and how to set it up. And this one I'm going to cover skinned meshes. In the previous ones we covered the house and this tree. So let's look at skinned meshes. So let's move the house or hide it. Deactivate children. And zoom in. There should be a guy. Wait, let's delete that. It's just an empty game object at this point. Okay, so we have this construction dude that we want to make into an LOD. So how do we do this? So we create an empty game object. We'll call it guy. This is exactly the same as before. We'll drag this constructor dude into guy. Then we will add the LOD component. Okay, create other component, Mesh Baker LOD component. We add a level, and one important detail on this is I can't drag this root to here because it doesn't have a render on it. So I have to dig through the component I added and find the part that's got the skin mesh renderer, and I have to drag that up to this renderer slot. And then of course I set the screen percentage distance. So let's set that to, like, I don't know, half the screen or something. Now you might notice something really funny. The distance from camera to switch is 430. What's with that? So when this guy fills half the screen, Unity is telling me that I'm 430 units away. That seems strange. What's that? Or why is that? That it looks like he should be maybe 10 feet away for that. So the reason that's happening is because on this particular model, the render bounds are a crazy amount. So Mesh Baker LOD, when it's doing this calculation, it's using the render bounds, and the largest dimension of the render bounds is 125. So that's why this is being displayed, so you can understand in situations like this, which is way bigger than the actual model. So we need to fix that. We need to make this render bound something reasonable. So let's bring that down to something reasonable. Zoom way in. Where is my model? Okay, there he is. Let's get the front before we lose those handles. Zoom in, and when he's animated, his arms aren't out to the side. They're more at his side, so that's more accurate about what the render bounds should be. And turn him sideways. It's easiest to use this to get it exact. So somewhere around there is a proper render bounds. So now if we go back to our LOD component, now it hasn't updated that, and it won't until I switch this to something slightly different, but that's a more reasonable result. So it's saying the distance from camera to switch is 4 units. So let's set that a little higher, which means I set this a little lower, so that's 6 units. That's probably a good place to switch into the highest level of detail. Okay, so we've got that mesh that's going to be our high level of detail. Then let's add the next level of detail. Now to do that, we want to use the same rig, and I'm going to switch the mesh. So basically I used an external or another tool to create a lower vertex count version of this mesh. But I want that mesh to have the same animations and everything. So I'm just going to duplicate the rig. And we'll call the first one LOD0. And I'll call the second one LOD1. And on the second one, I'm going to go down and get my lower poly mesh, which I exported using my other asset called mesh master, and it saved that's the city scene. I want the skin mesh scene meshes. Okay, so here is my mesh. I need to dig down in here to get to the skin mesh renderer, and there's the mesh, and I'm going to swap it for this one, construction worker. So if I deactivate children, you can see there's a lower poly version of the construction worker. So he's obviously a lower poly, but he's still fully animated, and he's got bones and bind poses at a bind pose, so he knows how to animate. Then the final level of detail, I'm going to use. It's not going to be a mesh or a skin mesh. It's going to be this incredibly low poly kind of lollipop type mesh. There's only 37 vertices in this mesh, and we have to apply the same. But he uses the same material. I UV mapped him so he can use the same material as the constructor dudes. So material is worker 1, so let's drag worker 1 onto that guy, and then I'm going to, that doesn't quite look right. Is that the right material for that guy? Maybe I didn't use, okay, where am I? Let me just glance at the, oh no, I didn't use him. I used a different material on him. There. Okay, and obviously his rotation and stuff is wrong, so let's fix that. And rotate him this way. So -90, so this should be 90, I think. And that all looks right, and then translate him over. If I go like that, he probably will translate to roughly the right spot. Let's make sure these guys are translated to the right spots. There, and he's obviously too big, so let's scale him. Constructor dude 3. So get him to about the same size and about the same location. Shift him just a little bit. Okay, so those are our 3 levels of detail. So I've set up the first one. Let's add these other 2. Constructor dude 1 and constructor dude 3. Okay, so this now the LOD should set up, but we need for the LOD manager to be able to handle this, we need a Baker that can handle the materials on these. So let's game object, create a new Baker, create other mesh Baker, mesh and material Baker. Let's parent to the LOD manager. We'll call this skin meshes. We go into the texture Baker, and I'm going to add 2 objects. I could add all 3 levels, but I only need one that has the worker 1 material on it, and then this constructor dude has a different material. And And then we can create empty assets. So we go into the combined materials, we call it skinned meshes. Save. And we bake the combined materials. Now, if we look into the atlases that are generated, okay, skinned meshes. So there's the asset, and it generated a bump map and a skinned mesh mat. These are both atlases. So you just might want to, and it's a bumped specular material that it's using. So usually we do want to check these settings and make sure that the atlas bake produce reasonable results. Okay, so and then we have to add that game manager or that mesh baker to the LOD manager. So we add another baker here. We drag the skinned mesh in. Now for skin meshes, we can't use the grid cluster type, and that's because the skin meshes can wander from one cluster to the other, and then when we're removing them from one cluster, they would get added to the different cluster, and it gets very complicated. So you have to use the simple clustering type, which is one global cluster for the entire scene. Although you could have different bakers for each kind of skin mesh render, and you could use labels to force some skin meshes to be baked by one baker and other skin meshes to be baked by another baker. Update skin mesh. We want to click this update skinned mesh bounds box, so that'll keep the bounds of the it'll keep updating the bounds on the the combined mesh. And max numbers per level, we'll get to that in a minute. Let's just see if this guy works. So if I push play, okay, guy LOD level 0 is a skinned mesh, but Baker render type was mesh renderer. Okay, so we have to go to our skinned mesh baker object and switch the renderer to skinned mesh renderer. So it's going to combine these meshes into a skinned mesh, not into a regular mesh. So let's try again. Okay, guy level 0 is a skinned mesh. Okay. On this LOD component. Okay. So there's another setting we need to, which is on constructor guy, we've got these level of this LOD, and we're going to set the render type here to skin mesh. So that has to be set to skin mesh too. So skin mesh, why is this not working? Guy LOD level 0 is a skinned mesh, but Baker render type was mesh renderer. Baker render type must be set to skinned mesh. Oh, it didn't take. There we go. Oh wait. Oh, I probably did it in play. That's why. There we go. Oh, screen percentages must be in descending order. So I have not set the screen percentages, or all the screen percentages are set to the same thing. So let's say 0.2, and that'll switch it. Now let's go 0.1, that'll switch at 18, and then we'll call the guy at 0.05, and that'll switch at 29. Yeah, 0.01. 02. They'll call them at 70 or something like that. So press play again. Boom, he works now, okay? And there was a bake. Alright, so let's test this guy. So he seems to be in, let's turn sideways, get the camera. Now if we move closer, there he popped into the highest level of detail. And if we move away, he pops into the lower level of detail. And then if we move a little farther away, he should pop into lollipop. There is lollipop. And the specular on that is terrible, so you should do a bit of adjusting on the material to get this to fix that specular problem. You probably have to change the material on the source object so it has a specular map setting, and you can set the specular very low. Yeah, so that guy is set up. So let's prefab him now. So combine materials, we go to the tutorial, create a prefab, call him dude, drag him in, and how are we doing? Okay, so there he is, and he's prefabbed. Let's create a couple more, because I want to show you a really neat trick that you can do. So there's 4 of them. Oh, there's one other thing we might want to look at here, which is the animation. So if you're combining a whole bunch of skinned meshes, the safest setting is always animate. But that means that the animations on all of these renders are always happening, which is pretty expensive. So you might want to look at these animation settings. So there's different culling types based on renderers. Doesn't work with combined meshes, and the reason is the animation component is located on this game object in the hierarchy, and the renderer is located below it in the hierarchy. And the way that culling based on renderers works is the animator component looks on itself or below in the hierarchy to find a skinned mesh renderer. But if this skin mesh renderer is disabled, which it will be because this mesh is in the combined mesh, then that animations won't play. So obviously that animation setting doesn't work well with combined meshes. However, you could look at clip bounds. So when the animation clip bounds goes out of the viewing frustration, it stops. So that's probably the best setting for us to use. So animate based on clip bounds, and the ultimate heavy-handed approach is to base it on user bounds, where you can update the bounds object and when the animation clip goes out. And that's a way to control, because if you look at the stats view, animations, so there's 10 animations in the scene. If I push play, let's see if that drops down. It drops down to 2 animations. So that's something to consider when you're combining skin meshes. For now, I'm just going to set them to always animate. And oh yes, the cool trick I was going to show you. So we've got these 4 guys, and let's actually duplicate these to make a bit of a mob. And duplicate them again to make a mob. And so we've got this mob, but this is a lot of vertices to have really close to our camera, and Unity animating all these and stuff. So in the Baker that we created for the skin meshes, we can say maximum per level. So let's set this to 2 for it to start with. So I can say I want 2 meshes to be allowed in the highest level of detail, and 3 meshes to be allowed in the next level of detail. and I won't say anything about the third level of detail, and basically all the rest of the meshes will be forced into that level of detail. So let's look at how that works. Look into our scene. So here we go. So we've got, our camera's not close enough to get two meshes into the highest level of detail. So let's go to the main camera, move it closer. There. So you can see there's two meshes in the highest level of detail, three meshes in the lowest level of detail, and Mesh Baker LOD moves the meshes so the ones closest to the camera are always the ones in the highest level of detail as the camera moves around. Pretty nifty trick. Okay, and so that works really well for huge mobs, for example. Now, a couple other things about this setting. I could say I could limit the third level of detail as well. So I want this to be 3, and I'll want to say 3 meshes in the last level of detail. So this means at any time in this cluster there will be a maximum of 8 meshes displayed. So we've got more than 8 meshes on the screen, but if I press play, some of them disappear. So only the 8 closest ones are displayed. And actually it's less than 8 because I'm not using the closest level of detail at all right now. But if I grab the main camera and move it closer, so as I move around, it's always the meshes that are closest to the user that are displayed. So this is particularly useful if you have maybe like 1,000 skin meshes mobbing the camera, and you only want the closest 200 to be displayed or something like that. And then as the user destroys meshes that are close to him, it keeps showing more meshes in the background. So it's a way of managing large crowds. Anyway, I think that's all I have to say about skin meshes. So Mesh Baker LOD is available in the Unity Asset Store. It requires Mesh Baker, so you need both assets. And there's more information on digitalopus.ca, and check out my other assets. Anyway, I hope you found this useful.